Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Classical Republican Book Review. So, today we're reviewing On the Terms of the People, Chapter 4, Democratic Influence. And this has a lot about institutions, which was very interesting. In Section 1, you have the plenary assembly. And that's kind of the Rousseauian idea that everybody is a legislator, and he compares this to Athens. A lot of people think of Athens as the most direct democracy the world has ever known, but he also argues that that's kind of a misnomer, and it wasn't really a very good example of direct democracy. But that's what most people think of today. He goes over problems of majoritarianism and how such large assemblies are difficult to run. Therefore you need a smaller representative body. So should this smaller representative body be indicative or responsive is the question. And so indicative means that you have a random sample of people, and so that is representative when you have people who are a part of every group of society, kind of in a proportional mix. So, but there are problems with that. So he argues against indicative. He doesn't say it's bad, like you shouldn't have it. He actually argues that it is very important to have, some bodies taking on certain roles in government that are indicative, but only having a certain limited role. So the problems with an indicative assembly is they cannot be held accountable if they're not elected. They can be unimaginative. Maybe they were chosen and they thought maybe this was cool, but they're not really into it, and so they don't really do that much. And then they can be difficult for the people to control. In Section 2, before I go on to Section 2, I wonder if he didn't mention Florence, but I wonder if he was also considering a place like Florence, where during their two republics, they had, well, especially the one that lasted longer, they had the Grand Council, kind of copying Venice, but it was a council of 500, so a lot smaller, easier to manage. But it wasn't exactly 500 people in that role. They sat in numbers of 500, but there was actually 1,500 who were members of that body, and they would rotate every 6 months. So I wonder if that's also indicative of what he was thinking of. And then there's also, and he actually mentions the British Columbia Citizens Assembly. So he talks about that too, and says, like, if they were running everything, it probably wouldn't be that good, but they're actually very important for solving certain issues. And watch my videos on Florence and British Columbia Citizens Assembly. So in Section 2, he argues in favor of a responsive assembly. He actually comes out in favor, he compares Westminster and Washington, and comes out in favor of Westminster over Washington. And he also says the dividing up legislative responsibilities is fine, but Westminster manifests the will of the people better. And also he goes on to say the people need freedoms of speech, association, and travel, and those are the most important ones. And if those are curbed, then it's really easy to see that these people are not free. And so they're not going to have the other things. They're going to be dominated. They're not going to have free institutions that can push back and stuff like that. So in Section 3, the electoral system must be individualized, unconditioned, and efficacious. And so those are the three most important qualities when you're looking at the electoral system. So individualized means, you have things like the referendum, you have direct elections of the legislature, and he said you could have indirect or direct elections of the administration or the judiciary. He talks about the billiard ball example where you have a giant billiard ball and you're supposed to push it to the side that you want, and so that kind of turns into a democratic use of the billiard ball to find the choice that needs to be made by the government. But you got to have equal access to that billiard ball, so equal access to the ballot. But he does caution against tyranny of the majority. It can be overcome by transparency, contestability, and impartiality. Let's go on to unconditioned. So you have to have the mixed constitution and a contestatory citizenry. The mixed constitution requires separation, separation, sharing, and balance of powers. Okay. The contestatory citizenry requires vigilance and activism, but not where everyone belongs to to several watchdog groups and takes up all your time as a citizen. You don't need to be that active, but you do need to be active in your community and taking an active role in helping to make decisions and making your ideas known. Apathy can degrade this element of republicanism, so got to be careful. And apathy is just so prevalent. Maybe it's not as bad as before COVID, but I think it's still very bad. But yeah, before COVID, people were just so apathetic. On page 228, he goes into a little more detail about this. I want to share with you. It says, these observations show that the contestatory spirit required under a Republican regime counts as a form of civic virtue, albeit virtue in a sense in which it ought to be readily achievable. But there is one other aspect of this virtue that we ought also to stress. This is that while it consists in a willingness to challenge public proposals and policies, alleging that they are not supported to challenge public proposals. Read that line again. And not supported by the people, or not supported in a manner that treats all members as equals, it presupposes a commitment to living under an arrangement where all members of the community can share in a system of equal popular influence. Contestatory virtue is not the sort of contrarian or sectarian disposition that opposes compromise and accommodation. It is the virtue of citizens who embrace the ideal of a republic in the community in which they happen to live. They are in that sense patriots. And he's paraphrasing Veroli in 1995. See my videos on Veroli. And who are willing to do all that is required for realizing the ideal. Not only are they patriots in supporting their country internationally to invoke the usual application of the idea, more relevantly for our concerns, they are also patriots at home. They are committed to establishing an undominating government in their country, just as it is, and rather than yearning or working for a land governed by their particular tribe or creed or color, they accept that this will require accommodation on all sides, their own included. And then we go on to efficacious. So it's popular influence. The popular influence must run wide and deep, but there are three dangers. 1, self-interested elected politicians. 2, private lobbies. And 3, unelected authorities. So those aren't bad in and of themselves, but they can provide an inordinate amount of pushback or become an obstacle to popular influence. So that's the second to last chapter in our book, The on the people's terms. Until next time, long live the Republic.